Good evening all and welcome. The following story is a true recounting of one family's nightmare while living in a haunted house. So join me over at Liberty Street and let the darkness take control. During the summer of 2020, sitting up in Washington with my in-laws around a small fire on their farm, my brother-in-law and his wife began telling ghost stories. These were stories they had heard, as well as others, including folklore and legends. I love hearing these stories, and they're great for setting the mood. I always enjoy a good ghost story. My wife seizes the moment, looks at them and says, "He was stabbed by a ghost while he slept. Show him the scar." Their faces turn to confusion. What am I about to show them? As I have done dozens of times for friends, family, and the curious, I show them the scar under my left pec. The size and shape, unmistakable. They gasp and ask what happened. This is a common question, and it is the first I'm asked every single time I show the scar. My answer is simply Liberty Street. I start telling of the events the same way I start this writing, the same way with the story of the realtor that sold Liberty Street, Chris. I will tell this story in full later. The following vignette is the brief introduction I always give to Liberty Street. My mother told Chris why we were selling the house, and Chris boldly told my mother, "I've sold dozens of houses, had many people tell me their house is haunted, and I've yet to actually have something happen. I don't believe in ghosts." His first open house, just days after taking on Liberty Street, ended within an hour, and him leaving the house. Following that incident, for the next year the house was on the market, he refused to step foot in that house alone, and only went in when he had to. The vignette sums up the 10 years we owned that house. The impact it has had on my life is daily. Every nightmare I have takes place in the same setting, Liberty Street. The paranormal does not scare me. I'd not mind going into a haunted place and seeing if I can find a ghost. And I do not mind watching documentaries on the subject of ghost hunting shows. Aside from the physical scar given to me by Liberty Street, I will forever carry an emotional and psychological scar, one that only manifests itself in my dreams late at night. I do not dream about what happened, but they are always about revisiting the house and trying to escape it, as we did in the fall of 2003. Between 2003, when it dawned on us what was happening, and when we sold the house in 2006, I had, with the help of family and friends, compiled dozens of photographs, several hours of audio and video recordings, and stacks of written incidents, all of which with the same basic ghost hunting gear: compass, flashlight, tape recorder, that was filled in a briefcase. This was one of my last items that left the house. When I opened it, I found it empty. The only item from my evidence kit at Liberty Street that was not taken was a red 2D-cell maglite flashlight and a little compass/whistle/thermometer that I got sometime in the late 90s. I kept this light at my desk, and the whistle gadget is squirreled away. Though I have upgraded the bulb since then, this light remains one of my greatest treasures, and is a reminder of the only solace and to my physical safety I had during those dark nights for much of those 12 years we had at Liberty Street. Over the course of my life, I have wanted to put these stories to paper. My mother and I still talk about Liberty Street, and it helps ease our mind. My sister will never speak of it. My father never had anything happen to him. Don't worry, this will be discussed later. And the friends that stuck by me and helped me gather evidence, I have either lost contact with, have passed away, or refused to talk about Liberty Street. These stories are based on memories from both my mother and I. As I mentioned earlier, no paranormal record of this house survives. But to add to this mystery, 40 years of property records of this house are missing. In 2003, my mother and I spent a weekday at the county clerk's office. We found the house was built in 1922, a few miles from where it was moved to in the early 1960s. Records from 1922 until the time were moved onto the property, and in the early 60s do not exist. The house today has been renovated, and aside from the color and location, it's unrecognizable. Every story has a beginning, and Liberty Street did not happen all at once. It's like a frog sitting in a pot of water, slowly being heated to a boil. The frog does not realize what is happening until it's too late. The fact of the matter is that Liberty Street was supposed to be our dream home, a place to build a new family. Instead, it was our hell. I was born in 1991, the product of a successful honeymoon. My parents lived right on Lake Erie in a dilapidated rental home where the floor slanted from corner to corner. Once I was born, they moved to a rental home in the city. From around the years 91 to 94, we lived there. My sister was born at the end of 92, and by then they were starting to look for a better home. In 94, there was a shooting/hostage situation across the street, and our driveway became the command post for the city SWAT team. This caused my family to start the house hunt. They soon found Liberty Street, and the owner was all too eager to be rid of it. My grandparents assisted in the purchase, and we moved. With 2 young children, the fact it was behind the local elementary school was perfect. It was the same school my mother attended, and some of her old teachers were still there. The neighborhood was quiet. To the east, butting up to our property, we had thick woods. Across the street to the north, we had one neighbor and the elementary school playground and field. To our south, about 50 yards off, we had an old man in a run-down house who kept to himself. And to the west, across the street, we had quiet neighbors. The home was a 2-bedroom affair, and my grandfather was commissioned to do the add-on to expand and renovate the home into a place where we could live and grow. Like the frog, we entered the cold water, and things were mostly quiet. And from there, the stove turned on, and we unknowingly waited and began to boil. Not much happened the first year, but the stage was set. One thing about Liberty Street I will always remember is the house came alive once the sun went down. There was no such thing as peace, only fear. Like the frog, this would increase by degrees over the years, until one could be in a room with others and feel completely alone. The remodel began around 94 to 95. My sister and I both had our rooms, and my parents would sleep in the living room, as their room was being built along with the kitchen. Growing up, my mother was always taught that there were no such thing as ghosts. This belief was challenged in many ways during the remodel. As her and my father would go to sleep, the house would come alive. My father is a heavy sleeper, always has been and always will be. This did not help that feeling of isolation for my mother. Kitchen cabinets would open and close, drawers would clang, thumps, walking, and a whole plethora of noises would happen all night long in the new kitchen. My mother related to me that many nights she cried herself to sleep in fear with the blankets over her head, wanting to pretend this wasn't happening. She would tell herself the same line, "Ghosts don't exist." Over the years, the poltergeist would plague us every step of the way. We never got a moment's peace from it. Almost every day, something would happen that would make us scratch our head. But, like my mother, we told ourselves that ghosts do not exist. I was too young to understand if anything happened to me, and I do not remember anything physical weird noises, etc. happening to me during this time frame. One thing that was a random part of Liberty Street that we could not explain was the smell of alcohol. It would happen periodically. Sometimes Liberty Street would have this bar-like smell to it. My parents didn't drink. They don't drink now for religious reasons, and the only time any of them drank was when I was old enough to drink, and that was in 2012. Except my father, who would have a beer at a restaurant on a very special occasion. There was no reason as to why this strong smell of alcohol would be present in the house. We never paid attention to it, but it would happen every now and then over the years as we lived there. As previously stated, one always felt isolated no matter how many people were in the room. My sister and I were no strangers to this. The one thing that stuck out to me this first year was just how much you felt like you were being watched. Every move you make you felt was being observed. Everything you did, you felt like someone was there with you, a silent observer. The dark scared me. I hated being in the dark. There was nothing redeeming about the dark. At this time I was in preschool and I had met Eric Robinson. Eric took great pleasure in harassing me every chance he would get. He would eventually graduate high school with me, but he was the first ever bully I had. He would tell me that monsters were going to get me, as would aliens. I chalked up the feelings as the monster, and my mother spent many a night doing what she could to get me to sleep. I took to sleeping with blankets and pillows covering my head, except for a small hole to breathe, and it took me until high school to break that habit. The feeling of being watched was not limited to my sister and I. My parents, having only been married a few years, would have many intimate moments together after we would go to bed in their newly built bedroom. According to my mother, they never had peace. They would feel like they were being watched, and that they were not alone. It was not very conducive to the mood. And around this same time, the cold spots began. One thing that we could never understand for many years is why the house would suddenly get cold. My grandfather was a master of his trade, and quality was his signature. If he built it, it did not fail or fall apart. Despite significant insulation and quality heating systems, the house would randomly get cold. It did not matter what time of year, there would be cold spots. Later it would get so cold despite layers of blankets that I took to sleeping in a jacket. Cold spots, feelings and noises would soon be only part of the activity. As shortly after 1996, we would meet even more characters. With each one came a new experience and less peace, and as we grew, so did the characters. These couple of years were happy times, and really a few years after were as well. However, as we adjusted to having new bedrooms, those creepy feelings began soon, and I would meet the second character, who we call the Old Woman. It has been often said that renovations or new changes to a home can cause an uptick of ghostly activity. For us, the end of the renovations and my starting kindergarten made things of the past seem small. I still had my fear of monsters and aliens, thanks to Eric, and my thoughts on ghosts were limited to the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow and other similar things. Yes, I was still creeped out, but it was chalked up to by my parents as me being a normal child. I can still remember the first time I saw what I thought was a ghost. I was at my grandparents' house, as my parents were having date night to themselves. The next morning I woke up at around 5 a.m. and went to their upstairs living room. I looked out the front window and saw a car go by. I thought I saw the car disappear. Then I heard thumps and other noises coming from the bathroom behind me. I was running back to my room past the bathroom when I collided with my grandpa as he was leaving the bathroom after getting ready for work. For many years I was convinced the car was a ghost, but I now think it was just young me imagining the car disappearing. Liberty Street would soon yield similar encounters, but unlike the above story, the reality was much different. My wife jokingly called me a crusty old man, partially because she is 9 years younger than I, but also partially because I'm very set in my ways. Things have to have their place, and I have certain dislikes that just do not seem to make sense. One dislike I have is of bunk beds. I want nothing to do with bunk beds. I can sleep in them, but they have to be open, with no weird cubby space related to them. This is of course because of Liberty Street. Another quirk, closet doors must be shut, and the hatches have to be battened down before bed. I hate adjusting to moved furniture in my bedroom. At Liberty Street, moving furniture in the bedroom brought on new and interesting terrors. As well, there needs to be some space between my bed and a door. I have adjusted our current position next to the door, but only because this is the only place our bed will fit, and there is a second person sleeping next to me. My quirks began when this new chapter of Liberty Street begins, with the old woman, and she is the reason I have to have space with doors. This is the first true ghostly experience I have had, and it happened in the middle of the night, one random evening. The foot of my bed was facing the door, and I felt it before I could see it. The room grew quiet, and my eyes suddenly fixated at the bedroom door. I sat up confused as to why I was feeling this. As my eyes were glued to the door, I could feel something was wrong. And in she walked, a woman built like my mother, with similar features yet older. Her walking did not seem in time with her motion. Silently she glided in the few short feet from the door to the foot of my bed, and in the few seconds I saw her, I was only utterly confused and wordless. Then I got out. "Mum?" Her steps were silent and moved quickly. When she reached the foot of my bed, she was gone. I screamed and ran as fast as I could to my parents' room, where I was promptly sent back to my room after being told, "Your brain's just playing tricks on you because you woke up." For a few years she would make an appearance. Sometimes you would think you saw an old woman out of the corner of your eye. I learned after we moved that Mum even saw her a few times sitting in a rocking chair. She was never frightening. She always looked pleasant. She would have a nice little smile, and always as soon as you saw her she was gone. Seeing was not all that would happen. Sometimes at night, or at random times, you could feel a loving touch. You would feel like when a grandmother would lovingly touch you. We did not acknowledge this woman for many years, and to be honest, she was the only character that we did not have any negative interactions with. It was like she was trying to live her life. One of the most frustrating aspects of Liberty Street was the fact that friends would stay the night and never want to return. In elementary school, I had a few friends that would hang out with me, and it was consistently limited to Brian Cartman, Jimmy Davis, Dustin Rogers, and David Johns. David stopped talking to me after his encounter, another story much later. Dustin is now passed away, having taken his own life a few years ago after a troubled life filled with addiction, and even after the Great Hunt, explained in a later chapter, he stopped talking to me. Brian Cartman still looks on the Great Hunt as a separate hunt we did with fondness, but then again he does love this stuff. I never quite figured out why until I reflected on Timmy Davis. The overall experience of being a guest at Liberty Street can be summed up as Timmy summed it up. Timmy and I never spoke of the Great Hunt again, but anything that happened to him was only spoken to me, and in hushed tones. His mother and my mother still talk every now and then, and his mother knows we left Liberty Street because of everything. She has repeatedly said over the years, "I've asked him if he's had any experience there and he gets all quiet and says I don't want to talk about it." Even my old nemesis, Eric Robinson, and I tried to get along, and he came over once. We pitched my dad's issue tent in the basement and played video games until 10 p.m, which was late for a first grader. I slept pretty good that night, but Eric didn't. In fact, the next morning, Eric wanted to go home as soon as he could. I was puzzled because we had such a fun night playing Super Nintendo. I asked him later why he didn't sleep well and why he wanted to leave so quickly instead of picking up where we left off. He got very quiet and said, "I heard things. All night I heard things." I told him that it was probably Dad upstairs, as he would stay awake until midnight every night. His response was, "Nah, it was after he went to sleep. I could hear people walking and talking upstairs all around the basement and I could hear things moving." Needless to say, any future invites were declined. After this point, Eric became so hostile towards me again, and some of his ribbing at first involved Liberty Street. I do not blame anyone for not wanting to return, and I don't blame anyone for not talking about what happened. Unfortunately for us, we didn't have the option of leaving yet. Every family has their sibling story. One sibling did something and both siblings blamed the other, and so on to the point that no one remembers what happened and why. For us, it will always be the Nintendo cartridge in the television. Once upon a time, we found one lodged into one of the built-in VCRs on a small television. My sister and I were old enough to know that it would not work, yet we both blamed each other. I believe my sister when she said she didn't do it, because to be honest, I damaged more things around the house than she ever did. Reflecting on this moment, I feel that the cartridge and television were just another victim of the poltergeist's playtime. A repairman was able to extract the cartridge and fix the television, but there were other things that could never be fixed. What first started as just noises soon turned into unexplainable things. We would find television remotes moved or gone, Nintendo remotes unwound, or rewound different to what we wound them, and there were many other items that would seemingly change locations throughout the day. One thing about my family is this: you do not lose an essential item. The world stops when this happens, and you do everything you can to find said item. Another thing about my family is that we can be tidy to a fault. If things are not in their place, or something is not done in the correct order, it's an issue. Do remotes make their way into couch cushions? Of course, but when a remote is in its basket, when everyone leaves the room, that remote will suddenly end up in the couch across the room from the basket. Well, it kind of makes you scratch your head. Remotes and video game systems were not the only victims. Sometimes chairs would be moved out of place, or couches relocated. Papers would take flight of their own accord, or books would fall off shelves when no one was in the room. There would be times where pictures would even fall off the wall, with no pattern or explanation as to why. Sometimes drawers filled up with toys would open in the middle of the night for no reason, but nothing was directed at us at first. I was diagnosed with asthma in the fall of '99 after the basement flooded. The mold got involved. Aside from the nebulizer that needed to be plugged into a wall and used, we had to buy an air purifier. Air purifiers back around the time were massive circular things weighing maybe 10 pounds that required a large amount of space. We had it mounted on this plastic drawer set that I used for some of my toys. It was a relatively sturdy structure and it did the job. There was a plug in the wall behind it, which was good because the cord was short. After I had gone to bed, the noises began, as they always would. I slept with a fan and this purifier, and I found it great to drown out the noises so I wouldn't have to focus on them. Suddenly the air purifier turns off. In the couple of seconds it took me to process this, I felt a giant and hard slam on my side of the bed. Immediately my parents come running in and turned on the lights. We found that the air purifier was right next to my bed, having just hit it. The cord had been unplugged and was lying next to it on the floor, having been launched several feet across the room. My parents chalked it up to the purifier falling off the bin unit. But a few things nagged at our minds. with the biggest being the cord was unplugged, and the bins were still upright and unmoved. Air purifiers were not the only thing that I visibly saw move. I had a penguin shirt I really loved, and by this point I was too big for it. I had gotten this shirt when I was a few years younger, so we pinned this shirt to my closet door. This shirt would sometimes start to breathe. What I mean is the chest would heave up and down, as if a person were in the shirt, breathing. I would call for my mother, and she would be in bed with me, and I would watch this shirt and tell her it was doing it again. She would tell me it was just my imagination, the light coming through the blinds that made it look like it was breathing but it wasn't, and that she'd stay with me until I fell asleep. Many years later, when we had the discussion, she would admit that those times she told me she didn't see anything, she was lying so that I could go to sleep, and that she was actually terrified to be in my bed because she was seeing the same thing happen in front of me. In the early years, it was just a nuisance, but as time continued, it would become even larger, more complex, and even more dangerous and targeted. Of all the characters, only one never interacted with us, and this entity I truly believe was a residual haunting, a recording being played over and over. This story is shorter than the others, however, it is important, as it caused us to look at ourselves and start questioning the events and challenging what we had been saying since we moved in, that there were no such thing as ghosts. For months I had been eyeing this playset of military vehicles, and my parents finally got it for me. I played with it the first night I received it, and as I always had, I woke up at 6 a.m. on Mother's Day just to play with it more. I had only been playing with it on the bar counter for around half an hour, when I looked up to the wall next to my parents' room. That is when I saw it. The blob was just that, a blob. It looked more like a heavy-set torso missing its arms, legs, and head more than anything else. It was your classic-looking white spectre, and relatively see-through. It moved from left to right, hovering around 3 feet off the ground. The starting point was my parents' door, and the ending point was the window across from it, right next to the back stairs. That day I told my mother about it. She was perplexed. At first she tried telling me it was my imagination. I drew her a picture showing her what it looked like, and she said, "Oh, that looks like it's just the paper from the drawing we have on the wall." As I pressed her further, she suddenly dropped the "it isn't actually there" routine that had been present for many years. She suddenly said, "Perhaps it's a guardian angel. Those do exist." For me, this was one small victory, and would put us on a path to admitting that something was living alongside us. There was one character we were always confused about, and this was Ursula. Where she came from, and why she was there, we will never know. Like the other characters, as the water began to heat up, she simply appeared. She would cause confusion and terror wherever she went. The first indication that someone new had joined the story was when Mum would freak out after seeing my sister somewhere else. She would walk by a room, see a girl playing, walk into another room, or we would come up from the basement, only for her to be confused as to why my sister was there instead of where she previously had been. This would happen more frequently as time wore on, but at first, it was talked up to a tired mother and hyper children. Ursula was also not confined to the Liberty Street house. Anywhere for her was fair game. Her distance would sometimes increase as the intensity increased, but in the early stages, she would stay near the house. The side yard was her favorite spot, and the tree located there was her favorite tool. During the summer, our favorite activities were hanging out with our Uncle John. Uncle John is Mum's older brother who lived with my grandparents. He had no interest in having friends, having children, or getting married. He took care of my grandparents. He would do all their yard work, help my grandpa out at his shop, and help run the home. He also loves books, all kinds of books. When he and my grandpa moved in with us, we counted almost 2,000. He fostered Rachel and I's imagination. We always enjoyed when he would come over because we could hang out and have fun with him, and it would allow Mum to run some errands. One such errand run, Uncle John took Rachel and I over to the school's playground across the street. We were running and having fun. Mum was out and due back any time. When she returned, we went home, and Uncle John had to leave. Mum was pale, flustered, and looking confused. But we didn't find out what was wrong at the time. And it wasn't until years later that she revealed the source of her discomfort that day. You see, when she pulled into the driveway, she saw what looked like my sister peeking from behind the tree. She smiled and went over to see her, thinking she was playing a game. As she rounded the tree, there wasn't a person in sight. She looked over, and 300 yards away across the street, and through the chain-link fence of the school, she could see us, playing without a care in the world. Myself, Uncle John, and Rachel. No other children lived on our street, and the area around the tree was open. There was no physical way for her to get from the tree to the school. Of course, my mother's mouth dropped. These early encounters with her were not too scary, just puzzling. As the timetable increased, as did the terror caused by Ursula. Our human family members were not the only ones impacted by Liberty Street. Our dog Brady was another victim of the events and circumstances. Brady was a Bichon Frise, tiny foot-high, white puffball dogs that usually weigh 15 pounds. Brady was a little larger than most Bichons, and he was around 25 pounds. He was a little sausage for sure, and as a result was also incapable of jumping to things higher than a couch, though he could fit under some. He was limited to everywhere but the basement and patio, but that door was typically shut. We originally planned on only having a gate for the stairs, but then when Brady would go missing, we would search but to no avail. Only the sound of barking from the basement suggested he was down there, and a couple of times we would find him at the top of the stairs by the gate. We marveled at his ability to get through the railing and down the basement, but some things never really made sense. First, he was too poorly to fit through the railing. Second, the drop-off from the railing to the stairs would have been too much for him, and he would have fallen down the stairs. Third, the gate had no gaps big enough for him to even fit his face through. As well as a couple of times he tried to jump the gate simply collapsed, creating a ledge further out into the stairwell, for which only the drop would have been almost instantly fatal, and it scared him. To make the point quite clear, there was no way for Brady to get through that gate without us knowing, and to hinder him squeezing through, we opted for a plexiglass covering, secured the railing on the kitchen side so that Brady would not be able to knock it loose with his face. Any slight chance he was squeezing through the railing was now eliminated. Almost immediately, we had the same issue happen, and yet he would end up in the basement, despite any known physical way he could get down there. But then the mystery began to deepen. Sometimes we would find dog urine and feces in the basement, but Brady was back upstairs in another room asleep. This would also happen when Brady was in his kennel in the patio, past a locked crate door, a locked patio door, and a basement with the gate and plexiglass still intact. We got Brady around 99, and for the 4 or 5 years left that we lived there with him, this would be a continual experience. Within a year or so of us buying Brady, other things began to happen that we could not attribute to Brady. We began hearing a second dog in the house. Sometimes we would hear barking in a room and go into and rescue Brady, only to realize that he was in the room with us. Sometimes Brady would seemingly play tug of war with something that wasn't there. Other times, we could feel him playing under the couch while we were sitting on it, growling and shredding the underside. But when we would look under the couch, he wouldn't be there, realizing that it was still early in the morning and that he was still in his kennel. EVPs would capture close barking or growling from a dog, and later, photographs would show that the dog was an established character. Our family has a military tradition that goes back to the American Revolution and before. Most males in my family on both sides served in some capacity, never as commissioned officers, but mostly staying until they became NCOs. I spent 2 years chasing a commission in college, but due to asthma and internal politics, the ROTC unit sent the guy with scoliosis to the medical review board instead, and he secured a contract. Upon graduation, however, he was medically separated, his contract going to waste. A few years into Liberty Street, my father had just taken over as the platoon sergeant for his battalion's recent platoon. He would spend 20 of his nearly 23 years in the military in recon, either in the field 16 years or teaching it for 4, with the remaining 3 years in the military police corps as both a first company sergeant and company operations. And as is the theme for Liberty Street, small actions would become large actions. It started small. Plastic soldiers would be rearranged not into modern formations, but in files and columns from an older era. I would spend days setting up battles, only to find my position changed. My web gear would also change, with pouches changing sides. Then the noise happened. The sound of heavy shoes walking, orders being barked, and the sounds of shouting through a controlled yell. For example, "Wake up, let's go" being shouted early in the morning, and "Hey you" shouted randomly. Sometimes I thought they were my imagination. Around the time I began to be interested in World War I, it was a horrifying yet fascinating war to a young boy. Uncle John would get me books on the subject and would let me borrow his books as well. Additionally, my grandparents got me the World War I Doughboy G.I. Joe and a special edition World War I pilot G.I. Joe. The paranormal activity around all things World War I sharply increased. My doughboy would always have equipment rearranged no matter how I put it. The gas mask bag was always arranged for speed and comfort, rather than if it made sense to how I knew it. As the frog analogy, eventually things began to escalate to the point where I would catch glimpses of him, a slender soldier wearing a uniform from a bygone era. While the glimpses were quick, we never saw his face until much later in pictures. Without giving too much away from a later tale, he was a sergeant with the American Expeditionary Force, and he was always wearing a gas mask. Something that's very common in every ghost hunting show is someone getting pushed. The comment, "Hey, do you feel that? Hey, someone pushed me." Those are the most common lines heard, and is usually followed by intense running around and screaming in the dark, as the ghost hunters try and catch whatever pushed them on film. For me, the first time resulted in me losing consciousness for half a minute, followed by a good-sized headache when I came to. There was no screaming except for my mother and grandmother. It was a summer day. I was playing and having fun inside the house. My mother and grandmother were doing things in separate parts of the home. I was going up and down the basement stairs. There were 10, and I enjoyed counting them. When I was on the 4th stair and at the top, it happened. Something grabbed my leg so that I couldn't move it, and it gave me a push on one side so that I turned around and fell backwards down the stairs. I slid on my back, hitting every step until I hit my head to the wall. My world went dark for what felt like the snap of a finger. And next thing I knew, I was staring up at the stairs, my feet on the last couple with my head on the wall. My mother and grandmother heard the noise and came inside to see what happened. That's when they found me. My mother screamed. I had no outward appearance of a concussion, and with some ice and Tylenol, the headache went away. They chalked it up to me tripping, despite me telling them in the simple words of a child that my feet stopped working, but something made my body keep going. Sadly, this was the first of many similar things to happen over the last years we remained there. Every other month, or 2 weeks in the summer, Dad would leave for drill and annual training. For many of these, he would not even be in the same state. He would leave us with long weekends and some lonely time in the summer. Liberty Street never stopped. It seemed like new things were happening all the time. One of the common things that started to happen were the eyes, these glowing green eyes, and it always happened at night, never in the same place. You would see them on the bookshelf, the wall, by the penguin shirt, everywhere. When I saw them, I would call Mum and she would stay with me until I fell asleep. Like always, she told me there was nothing there. And like always, she was seeing the same things too. The noises increased as well. Knocking on the wall became more frequent. More toys began moving on their own. Lights began turning on and off. Mum would frequently hear typing on the computer when no one was around. It seemed as if we were going crazy, and no one felt safe. As a result of the increase, we devised a plan. We never spoke about what was going on, but we knew we did not feel safe. Our plan was simple. Drill weekends at AT. My sister Rachel and I would pile into our parents' room and stay with Mum throughout the nights. Later in the evening, we would barricade ourselves in the master bedroom, only leaving to get snacks and drinks, as there was a bathroom within their room. The odd thing is that there was a significant divide with the space inside the room compared to outside. Inside the room felt peaceful and safe, and outside the room was chaos and terror. And as soon as you went over the threshold into the kitchen, the energy changed. You would feel as if you didn't belong there, as if your presence was not welcome in any way. With the increase of the intensity of activity, it was clear that something was not right, but we continued forward thinking it was just the mind of children playing tricks. But the increased pace made one thing clear: the gaslighting would eventually need to stop. If there is one thing my parents were obsessed about, it's making sure the right lights were on and the rest of the lights off. Mum loves candles on the windows, in every room, and these were set on timers. The coordination of such was down to the second across all the candles. If we left the house, an entire sweep was made to ensure every light was off and every blind shut. Liberty Street can go from bright to dark in an instant, and our favorite activity was going for car rides. It was great around Halloween and Christmas when decorations and lights were everywhere. Our town was small, and most of the buildings were built in the late 1800s to early 19. And it being in the Midwest, the fall and winter was beautiful. We would go out for an hour or two, enjoying each other's company and the view. There was one problem though. When we would return, sometimes the lights would be on. Not just some lights, but every single light that we had would be on. This would cause a problem, as we knew we had turned off all the lights. What would you do? Call the police? They would think we're crazy. They'd have told us, "You just forgot to turn the lights off." So our only option was to handle it ourselves. As mentioned previously, Dad was a wizard at the invisible game, lights on or lights off. He could melt into the surroundings. He kept his equipment in the car that was parked in the driveway instead of the garage. He would grab his car bar and make his way silently through the patio door. clear the garage first, making sure everything was still in place. Then he would go room by room, closets, underbeds and shelves, etc. He reviewed everything. But there was no one in the house. External doors were locked with no signs of forced entry, and keys never went missing. Everything was always in its place except for the lights being turned on. This was not a consistent issue, but it happened frequently enough. It was always a toss of the coin when we returned. The issue was not limited to our leaving, nor was it limited to the lights turning on. Quite frequently, random lights would turn on or off. We could be down in the basement and notice the backroom light was on when we hadn't been in the back room. Or if we were leaving a room for a bathroom break, we would come back and the room would be dark. Sometimes this would happen while we were in the room. The response was always, well, maybe you didn't turn the knob or switch far enough. This was a frequent occurrence and a frequent response, something to add color to an unknown event. As the activity began to increase, one of the more disturbing bits of activity was the mimicking of other people. Many times we would hear something call out or say something, and when we would go ask them what they needed, they'd be confused. Nobody would be calling out for anything. Sometimes it would be subtle, but other times it would be plain as day, as we would never see the other person, but we would hear them. A couple of times multiple people in the same room would hear it, and would walk in and ask around what was wanted, with the person saying they didn't say anything. The best example is a situation that happened to my mum. While Mum was in the living room, she suddenly heard her mother walk in, and as plain as day announce, "Hello, sunshine," as she went to greet her as she always did. She was confronted by the fact that no one had walked into the house, and Rachel and I were in the basement. We didn't even hear this happen. She clearly heard someone come in and announce that they were there, along with other noises around this activity. But no one was. I am a sentimental person. I collect items, though my wife says I'm too sentimental with things. The only material items left from my experiences at Liberty Street are my flashlight and compass tool. This, however, is something that I will carry with me forever. When I die, this item will go with me, and no matter what I do with my body, it will stay with me. This is the scar that is on my left chest, right below my pec and over my ribs. It was the winter, and I was around 9 or so. When I would sleep, I would bury myself in blankets and pillows, and I would not move the entire evening because of the support from the amount of pillows and blankets holding me in place. This night I awoke in the middle of the night to a sharp pain in my chest. I, being 9 years old, didn't think about it, and went back to sleep. The next day I woke up and walked out my room. Mum and grandmother were livid. On the left side of my white long underwear was a patch of blood. They tore the shirt from me, and on my chest was a relatively deep puncture wound. As I had not been moved that night, and had nothing sharp in my bed, I did not know how the puncture wound came to be. While this was a stab wound, it was not exactly that sharp of a knife. It was more of a tear and a puncture, yet it had the shape of a knife wound. This was a wound made by a dull, wider knife, almost like a butter knife. All knives were accounted for, and there were no signs that any of them were responsible for hurting me. Later we assumed it was the ghost of the soldier, but that confirmation would not come until much later. In 2018, I purchased an M1 Garand, and along with it an original bayonet. The bayonet used by the M1 Garand, the M1 bayonet, is a shortened version of the one used on the M1903 of the First World War, is interchangeable between rifles. The M1917 was also the rifle used in the First World War, and was the standard issue rifle. This bayonet is essentially the same in terms of dimensions to the M1905, except the mounting components are different. Typically in films you'll see soldiers sharpening their bayonets awaiting the charge, or awaiting the amphibious landing. This is not the case. Bayonets up until the M7 bayonet, used on the M16 and M4 rifles, were issued dull. A bayonet was originally a stabbing implement. It was not fully designed for slashing. Additionally, it was found that a sharp knife will get stuck in the bone. The purpose of the bayonet was to go through bone, hitting organs on the other side. As a result, the bayonet was originally a dull blade which relied on a solid thrust by the soldier and the weight of the rifle to provide the necessary penetration. When I place the blade of the M1 bayonet to my chest, it's almost an exact match to the shape and scar size left. It is with confidence that if I were to assign blame on one character, it would be the soldier. This event was perhaps the most violent and damaging thing that happened in Liberty Street. Yes, later we would get scratches and bruises and other random acts that would happen, and objects would break, and these little cuts, etc. would fade and were of little consequence. But this wound festered for weeks and bled constantly. It became infected and required continual cleaning and bandaging. When it finally did scar, the scar was noticeable any time I didn't have a shirt on, and continues to be so. To ascribe a position for this incident, it helped open our eyes as to what was going on around us, and opened up the possibility that things were not all innocent games. Of course, there was gaslighting. Your fingernails must have done it. No, my fingernails are trimmed. Maybe it was from your watch band. No, I don't wear my watch to bed. The ugly truth was, we just did not know, but we wanted to put our minds at ease. It would take almost 2 more years for us to admit that there was a problem. Seeing the blob a few more times, and elf hunting, would lead to this realization that something was there, and that we would need to see it for what it was. Every child loves Santa Claus. Rachel and I were no exception. We also loved a good mystery, and I'll never forget the walk after Thanksgiving one year. Mum and Dad told us that following Thanksgiving, Santa would send his elves to spy on children with the intent to see if they had been naughty or nice. It felt magical, because now we had something we could try to find. It also provided an explanation as to what was happening around the house. Noises and activity were simply Santa's little helpers. So we assembled our equipment. We had a boombox that could record sound, and we had an old video camera. Sometimes we would use disposable cameras to take pictures, and we always had material to write down evidence. Our parents were thrilled. Not only would we behave, but we would also occupy ourselves on a snipe hunt. I fully credit elf hunting to our finally admitting there was a problem. Rachel and I set about our hunts with fervor, and we perfected our techniques. At first we didn't get anything, or what we did catch was tainted due to Mum setting something up. But one December day that changed. It was a snow day. We were home from school, Dad was at work, and we had nothing to do. We decided to do some elf hunting. We decided that we would leave the old boombox recording in the basement for half an hour, to make sure things were not tainted. Us, along with Mum and Brady, locked ourselves in the master bedroom. The reason for this is that this was the only room not over the basement, and as such, if we were quiet and sat on the bed for half an hour, nothing would pick up on the recorder except elves. We were snowed in, and our neighbors were not close and were reclusive, so we didn't have to worry about outside noise. After the half hour was up, we retrieved the boombox and tape. We expected 30 minutes of silence, and around 10 minutes in we heard talking. There was a conversation between 2 individuals. The pitch was a little higher, but we couldn't determine what was being said, and there was laughter. A few minutes later, we heard similar. The recording sounded as if something happened right next to the boombox. Rachel and I were thrilled. Mum, on the other hand, as we learnt later, was not. This success emboldened Rachel and I as we stepped up the pace. We caught similar recordings at later periods, but we never caught anything of quality. Soon the video evidence began. We caught toys and doors moving. One that sticks out to me was one video where Rachel and I create a hide site in the living room. We had our gear and were filming in the kitchen. At the time, Dad was smoking in the patio. He only did so in the patio with the door shut. Mum would sit out there with him and talk. On video, the doorknob turned, the patio door opened, and Mum and Dad peeked around the corner confused, and they assumed that we had done it. When we showed them the video, they chalked it up to Brady trying to go back into the house. The only problem was, he was not small enough and could not turn doorknobs. We kept up the game and more evidence came piling in. Tape recordings, videos, you name it, we caught it. And we thought for sure that there would be elves. When the question in school came up about belief in Santa, we proudly chimed in he does exist and that we have proof. Of course, no one believed us, but recording phenomenon caused us to evaluate some things, and soon we would have to have the talk and admit there was a problem. In a 12-step program, the first step is admitting that there is a problem. To be very frank, we could not discuss the situation without constant gaslighting. It's nothing. You're young and imagining it. It's a guardian angel. Nothing to be afraid of. They only come to visit every now and then. It's Santa and his elves. There were nothing but excuses in the replies. There was nothing of substance in the answers provided, and the conversation would quickly change to a different topic. One Mother's Day, I was sitting on the couch earlier in the morning. The couch began to shake a little, and I could hear a dog playing underneath. I thought nothing of it, until I realized Brady was still in the crate in the patio and needed to be let out. I made my way to the patio door, and right when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I felt an electric feeling come over me. I turned to catch the blob moving no more than 4 feet behind me. I was scared, but I took Brady out. I knew that it was time to have the talk. I was getting older, was around 11 or so, and ghosts were becoming a more common thing in school, as there were stories about ghosts in the library, etc. Everything that was happening pointed to one answer. Liberty Street was haunted, and we had ghosts living with us. At some point, I pulled Mum aside and we had a talk. I told her what happened. Maybe it was Brady. I told her how Brady was in the crate. Well, maybe it's a small earthquake. No, nothing else was moving and I heard a dog. Guardian angels visit sometimes, and they aren't scary. But all the time? Why are we scared? Maybe it's the elves? But it's not Christmas time. I don't know. What about ghosts? I chimed in. What if our house is haunted? I was met with more silence. I could tell she didn't want to answer that question, and after a few minutes she admitted that she had experienced a few things very similar to what we had. That while staying in our room she experienced the same things we were. That she was just as scared. We knew we had something going on, and we knew something wasn't right. But then the response turned to the old age one. We might have ghosts, but they can't hurt people. But what about my chest? We didn't want to entertain that thought. Our admittance and this new thought, our lives were about to drastically change, but at least we could finally admit that something wasn't right. The new saying was ghosts can't hurt you. It was a step in the right direction at least. We were admitting that something was going on. But what could a ghost do to us? They can't hurt us, just cause mischief. At least, that's what we said, and what some of the children ghost story books at school said too. Like always though, Liberty Street would make us eat our words. and soon the final character would join the show. The feeling of Liberty Street changed significantly after admitting that we did have a ghost issue. Like in any game, there is a final boss. Liberty Street loved playing games, and after admitting the reality of the situation, Liberty Street's final boss made an appearance. We eventually called this character Cousin It. To describe Cousin It, he was a tall shadow figure. Unlike many reports of shadow figures, this one not only did you see out of the corner of your eye, but he was right there. All hours of the day he could suddenly appear, and you'd see him. Even if the room was dark, he was darker still. And I've always thought of him as the ringleader of all the characters. He was the center to everything in the last chunk of our time there. His first public appearance was the middle of the night. Rachel had left her room to use the bathroom, and on her way back to her bedroom, she was drawn towards the living room. As she stood in the hallway door, she noticed something in the living room, darker than the night around it. The darkness seemed to glow almost. Then she heard a laughter, and she ran back to her room and stayed there for the rest of the night. Not long after this, he started to appear frequently. Shadows of people would move without reason. A second shadow next to you that moved independently. A visible darkness that would take over parts of the room. The dark outline of a person that had no distinguishable features. Cousin It brought a new level of terror to Liberty Street. Though I had been stabbed by something previously, Cousin It brought new levels of experiences with him, and while we had stated that ghosts can't hurt people, he challenged this. After we had admitted that something was wrong, and after Cousin It made his appearance, we began to notice things getting more physical. It started small, a tap on the shoulder, a short tug on clothing, and other similar behavior. Shortly, it would turn into things such as scratches, bruises, cuts, slaps, and everything in between. Marks would appear overnight, but nothing would wake up for it. Until this period, my parents were relatively immune to the touching. It was during this time that Mum had her first major touching incident. As she stood in the bathroom getting ready for the day, she felt two hands press on her back. They had such force that it physically moved her and pushed her into the sink. This incident still stands out to her as it was unexpected, and the force behind it was something she had not fully experienced before. Another example of this increase was when Mum discovered a large, welted and bruised handprint on Rachel's back. When asked about it, she was not aware this had even happened. When asked if this was from school or from me, she replied that it was not. Knowing Rachel, if something had done this to her at school, it wouldn't have ended well for that person. She has always been a capable fighter and is not afraid to stick up for herself. And additionally, while her and I have had some physical fights when we were in our single digits as younger siblings do, they were never bad enough to leave marks. And she was not afraid to tell in such situations. Handprints began showing up with more severity and frequency. If there is one thing that we would get in trouble for, it was touching the mirrored doors that made up my parents' closet. Mum would get so mad if we touched it, and their closet was off limits anyway, except for hide and seek. Yet daily handprints would show up in different parts of the mirror and at different heights. Mum would clean these off, but more would appear. This applied to bathroom mirrors too. No surface was off limits. Ultimately, it was the touching that would cause our departure from Liberty Street in the couple of years after this section. In movies such as Toy Story or Small Soldiers, toys come alive when people aren't looking. There's nothing creepier than the thought of a doll coming to life, or a toy moving independently. As we've already touched on, this would happen at Liberty Street. But, as with everything in this section, there was an increase. Instead of toys quietly moving when no one was around, toys started turning on in the middle of the night or at random times, irrespective of batteries or power. Two toys that stuck out to me were the Boo doll from Monsters Inc. and this electronic Godzilla toy from the 1998 movie. Godzilla would, at various times, either have batteries or not have batteries, but shortly after the arrival of Cousin It didn't matter. Some days you could hear him roam the spare room of the basement or hear him walking. It was a small shuffle done by a remote control. He could only be activated by that remote control, and both needed to have batteries. Sometimes it did not matter what had batteries, he would still make his roar and do his walk. As with everything else, it slowly increased. Once a week, once a day, twice a day. The second, more chilling example is that of Boo. Rachel loved her Boo doll, and it sat in her room. It had a couple of different phrases based on lines from the movie. The first was Boo, second was Kitty, and the final thing was a little tune that Boo sang in the movie. One night, as Rachel was asleep, she heard the doll exclaim, "Boo!" It woke her up. She looked at the doll, and as she was watching the doll, it lit up with Kitty. The next up on the list was, of course, the little tune, but instead it cycled back to Boo, and then Kitty again. She screamed. Mum and Dad entered the room and she explained what happened. They took the batteries out, explaining it was probably a short in the wire, and they went back to bed. Right after they left, Boo started singing her little tune. When Rachel looked at the doll, it went back into the Boo and Kitty routine. She screamed again. Mum and Dad came back and she hysterically explained what happened, and they got rid of the doll. In some action movies, individuals are shaken up when they find a previously unreleased picture of themselves on wanted posters or missing posters. It messes with their headspace oftentimes, and they have to come to terms with the fact that they're being hunted or watched. Such was the case with Liberty Street and the flying pictures. We've always had family photos on the walls and tables. Most families do. However, in the later years of Liberty Street, these would be used to target certain individuals. The best way to explain it is you would typically find your picture messed with, or sometimes someone else's. It would either be crooked, fallen, or placed in the center of a room. A great example is if you had to walk into the living room from the kitchen. You can see the living room from the kitchen. You could see up and down the house, but you were cooking in the kitchen. When you go into the living room, your picture would be in the center of the room facing you as you walked in. It might be on the hope chest or wall right before this, but now it's in the middle of the room. No one's there, or everyone else is in a different room. Mum and Rachel walked into the living room one day, and their pictures did not just fall off the wall, but went flying with great force towards them, landing in the middle of the room. No other pictures were impacted. The feeling when these things would happen is dread. Why is it my photo? What's gonna happen to me? There was never a clear answer, as sometimes nothing else would happen to the person in question. But other times, many things would happen. By this point, it was unmistakable that things were happening. This was around the middle of 2002. The last year and a half of us living at Liberty Street was upon us, and in addition to the little things, some bigger things were about to happen. Almost every horror film has a part where the protagonist has something that goes missing. Mostly it's something small, such as a trinket. And Liberty Street was no stranger to missing items. We always had things go missing. My parents are very organized people. Things just don't go missing. Many a times it was water guns or Lego creations. One minute they'd be in the room, the next they'd be gone. Sometimes things would turn up in other rooms minutes later. Other times it wouldn't turn up at all. The most expensive item to go missing was Rachel's Adidas jacket. Even while picking up and moving, we never saw the jacket again. and it belonged to us for only a few hours. It was time for back-to-school shopping. My mother and grandmother took us to the store, and afterwards we got our customary McDonald's and brought it home. Rachel really wanted this Adidas jacket, and they obliged. We set the jacket on the back of one of the bar counter stools, ate McDonald's, and went about putting some things away. We had one coat closest to the patio door by the fridge, and figured we would put the coat away once everything else was done. But when we got back to the bar counter, the coat was missing. We wondered who put it away, but it was only the four of us and we were all in the same room. We checked the coat closet, but there was nothing. Searched other rooms and closets, turned up nothing. We searched in places such as the back room, the master bedroom closet, etc. The coat had vanished. Rachel was devastated. We knew what had happened. Rachel felt targeted, especially since the addition of Cousin It, and she was scared. When we packed up to move, we searched every nook, every corner to no avail. Every box was opened and reviewed. Nothing. We never saw it after the day we brought it home. Rachel has yet to wear anything made by Adidas since that point, and has cited this as the reason why. This was the largest thing that we're missing. By this point, things were beginning to heat up though. We would still have some time left at Liberty Street, and the time grew shorter. If there was one way to describe David Johns, it is that kids wanted to be him and hang out with him. He was popular because his parents could afford the best stuff, and he knew how to play politics. His dad was a property lawyer, and his mum the school nurse. David was quiet, but not very loyal to anyone but himself. If he came over, you were one of the cool kids. For a little while, David and I hung out. Was I his go-to choice? No. I'm pretty sure he associated himself more with Eric Robinson and Timmy Davis almost every day of the week and almost every weekend, and I only got a small sliver of that time once upon a great moon. It was a big deal when David came over, and we had some great times. The second to last time was probably the best. After playing much in the way of video games, we decided to prank my dad. Dad loved having fun with us, especially if it involved using some of his work skills, so David and I put the plan together. We would set booby traps in the office, consisting of string mostly, and do similar things. We made it to the office and were in the process of setting things up when we got caught by Dad. We laughed and had a wonderful time. Rachel wanted in on the fun, and we agreed that next time she could. We decided to do this again a few weeks later, only this time it would be terrifying and the straw that broke the camel's back for David. The evening started off much the same. We had pizza, watched some movies, and went down to the basement to play some video games. For sleeping this time around, we decided I was going to take the couch, and he was going to take the single-sized bed that was down on the opposite side of the basement. The couch would see the stairs and the entire basement. The bed was against the far wall and could not see around the corner. We were going to prank Dad but felt too tired, so we decided to go to bed after playing some games. Rachel was disappointed. Around midnight I could hear tiptoeing up the stairs. I counted the stairs off in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and put my light on the stairs. You could see stairs 7 through 10, as there was a railing of sorts at the base of the stairs, and caught Rachel in the beam. We told her, "Nice try, but we're going to bed." I heard her go up the stairs into my parents' room. Around 15 minutes later, we heard it again. I counted again, 1, 2, 3, but was surprised when I heard step number 4 be the floor of the basement. I turned my light on. "Rachel, this isn't funny, go to bed." There was no one there. I could hear someone's presence. What I mean by this is I could hear the residual noise a person makes when it's dead quiet, and you can hear the natural functions of the body, such as light breathing, the sound of clothes rustling against an adjusting body, the sound a mouth makes as it adjusts. This person was standing at the base of the stairs. I couldn't entirely rule out Rachel. Then the footsteps began again. They walked up to the table that was 6 feet from me. No one was connected to those footsteps. They were a disembodied noise. As they stopped, I could hear someone's presence. David had his flashlight out, as he heard this as well. The footsteps started once more, walked right up to me, and in a second had passed by, all the way around the beam in the middle of the basement, and they started towards David. I heard him take a deep breath, turn the flashlight off, and pull the covers over his head. I still had my light on and could hear the footsteps walk right up to the bed and stopped. Again you could hear the presence, but no one was there. His bed began to shake, and I could hear what sounded almost like sniffling coming from the bed. He was shaking in fear. The footsteps started up again, heading in my direction, passed by the couch and back to the stairs. I counted, as in my head I listened to the footsteps on the stairs. 1, 2, 3. And like that they were gone after 3 steps. The next morning David played it off as, yeah, that happened, but so what? He never spoke of the incident again, and he never came over again. He became yet another person who decided Liberty Street was too much for them. Several months later, during the Great Hunt, David was sick, despite receiving an invitation and accepting. My guess is that he knew what was going to happen, and decided it was the only way to save face. Honestly, after what had transpired during the Great Hunt, it was probably for the best. There are only 2 people from elementary school that I still have any kind of contact with, Timmy Davis and Brian Cartman. We both enjoyed our fair share of bullying as we're both on the larger side, and enjoyed the odder things in life such as the paranormal. By this point, I was already done. We recently caught up and discussed things such as our favourite hunts over the years. He had some good ones back home and caught some good paranormal evidence, and all of this started from one book, How to Find a Ghost by James Dean. By this point it was already out and done. We, my mum, myself and Rachel believed our house was haunted. Cartman loved the paranormal and enjoyed listening to some of my tales about Liberty Street. He had a few things in his home happen to him, but of course nothing quite on the same scale. Our 6th grade teacher, Miss Monroe, encouraged curiosity and exploration. She maintained a great library of books on subjects ranging from mummies, bog bodies, Egyptians, and even Arctic mummies, the old legends and mythology. One book she had piqued our fancy, How to Find a Ghost. The book provided a simple background on different types of ghosts, leaving out anything that might be malevolent, as it was geared towards children, and set out tradescrafts such as what we would need in our ghost hunting kit. And while we had some evidence from elf hunting, I decided we would need more. I assembled my kit of a 2D cell mag light flashlight to detect fluctuations in magnetic energy similar to an EMF reader, some laser beam alarms, cheap fun spy gear sold in toy stores, some string and tape and a notebook for writing material, tape recorder, and a small grey whistle / compass / thermometer combo tool I got for Christmas one year for Cub Scouts. With this I had the basics highlighted by Dean. I kept a clipboard and paper by my bedside and the rest of the kit in a briefcase that Dad gave me. I still have the flashlight and combo tool, and both have proved handy to me over the years, not just for hunting ghosts. The theory as set up by Dean is simple. Prepare your gear for the investigation and record everything. If you think other people saw the incident, interview them. Dean suggests using flour and tacks or tape with string to help track movement or see if someone is doing the activity. For this I had string and the motion devices, and the theory worked. Sometimes the devices would go off, and you could follow the movement of some invisible being through each device. I had 3 audible and 3 that connected to a central station to let you know when it was triggered. No one had gone through the area, and the string hadn't been disturbed, as would have been expected. The compass trick I learnt also worked, and sometimes the compass would suddenly move, indicating a change in the magnetic field. With this kit, I felt ready to take on Liberty Street, get some evidence, and show that something was really there. Little did I know how much use this simple kit of mine would get. There are 2 books that have had a profound impact on me. The first, and a different one, called Ghosts, Ghostly Tales from Folklore by Alvin Schwartz, and written for very young children. I have already detailed how Deem's book influenced me. The final tale in this book was called Criss-Cross Double-Cross Ghost Get Lost. According to this charming tale, by saying those words, it will scare away the paranormal. We all loved this book when I was in elementary school. We would read the stories from the book every chance we got during the library. We were intrigued with the tales of haunted houses and other scary goings-on. So between the first book, this story, and our interest, we decided to have fun and prove once and for all that Liberty Street had ghosts. It was a nice day near the end of March. My friends and I were going to have a party, as only 6th graders can. Cartman, Timmy, and Dustin were going to come over, have fun, and hunt some ghosts after everyone went to sleep. They arrived at 3. David, as we know, was invited but claimed he was unwell. I had assembled the kit prescribed by James Deem: flashlights, a small stick camera, tape recorder notebook, some chem lights from Dad, and an old military-issued compass to use as an EMF reader. If the compass spins when it shouldn't, ghosts are present. We would, as always for these kind of events, sleep in the basement. We had a grand old time. We enjoyed pizza from our favorite pizza joint, played with various Nerf guns, swords, cardboard tube weapons I had created with duct tape. Oddly enough, the scenario we imagined was something out of World War I, where we had to sweep our enemy trenches. We played video games, watched cheesy movies on the science fiction channel, some old movie about some saber-toothed tiger against a bunch of cavemen, and had a good time. We never really had a full plan on how or when we would do hunt, just that we agreed to keep the camera in a central location with a new set of film. The plan was really, okay, when weird things start happening, it'll be go time. So we continued on. The night would never be peaceful. We were not as prepared as we thought when the first thing happened. It was when we were playing with some toys next to one of our cots. We noticed that the sheet and blanket on the cot had been turned down, as if ready for someone to jump in and sleep. Dustin was unaware that this had happened. The night turned quiet and serious. First blood had been drawn. As per Deem's instructions, we began collecting ghost reports and writing down our actions. No one saw a thing, but we still documented everything. We opened the old briefcase, got out our stuff, and just waited and listened. My dad went to sleep, and as usual, Liberty Street came alive. It was Cartman who heard it first, followed by me, then Timmy, and Dustin was, as with the sheet incident, unaware. Someone was walking around upstairs. We could hear the floor creak. Bravely, Cartman and I went up the stairs, only to find the living room above us empty. We went back downstairs and related the tale to Timmy and Dustin. Timmy was scared, but not enough that he wasn't his happy-go-lucky self. Cartman was eating this up because while he had had some things happen to him in his home or at school, he had never had so much happen in such a short time. Dustin was disappointed. He had missed both things and desperately wanted something to happen. Within half an hour, things died down. Dustin sat at the base of the stairs for a few minutes looking up into the kitchen, and we asked him what was wrong, and his response was, "I want to see a ghost." We all went over and brought him back to our main area, where we had some plastic soldiers set up. When we got back, no more than 60 seconds later, we noticed a good chunk of stuff had been moved. Soldier formations were not the same as how we left them, and items lay across the room, and had been moved as well. Like, Timmy's bag ended up in Cartman's cot, and my flashlight ended up in Timmy's bed. The camera was still unused. We didn't want to waste film in case of the big one. That is, if suddenly the room got super cold or something major happened right there in the basement. So we continued on. When boys eat pizza and drink soda, we must let it out. There was no bathroom in the basement, so we had to use the one in the living room. We decided to go as a group. It didn't matter who had to go, we all went. Timmy was last in line. He wanted to pull security. I took point, and the four of us went to the bathroom. Timmy was all smile and joking until we got to the top of the stairs. Afterwards, he went deathly quiet and pale. We did our business, went back to the basement, busted out more toys, and began to play. But Timmy was quiet. We asked him what the matter was, and he said about 30 minutes later, "I saw a ghost." We pressed for more details. One thing I had never spoken to anyone was specifics about patterns, locations, or actions about any of our characters, as specified in the James Dean book. So Timmy drew out the character, its actions, and route taken. When we were in the kitchen, less than 15 feet away from us was the blob. Timmy described it perfectly down to the smallest detail. It started at my parents' door, moved silently to the window, and vanished. As he was the only person facing the rear, he was the only one to have seen it. The small details were things I had never shared with anyone outside my family, and after that, we used the camera quite frequently. Occasionally we would hear random things happening, such as drawers opening or something walking. But when we would go upstairs, there wouldn't be anything. We still snapped some pictures. Dustin grew more anxious as the night wore on, as he had yet to have something happen to him directly. Everyone else had had their things moved, and he had not seen or heard anything. We continued and had fun, but there was a lingering feeling in the air. We were afraid to sleep. Timmy took a blank piece of paper and wrote down the words "criss-cross, double-cross, ghost, get lost," and taped it above his bed. When it was close to 3 a.m., we retired for the night. If there's one thing about Liberty Street that was an issue, it was the factor of control. Things would only be seen if they wanted to be seen. Things would be heard if it wanted to be heard. There were no genuine coincidences. The characters would become frustrated and exact a do-unto-us mentality. Dustin was frustrated. He wanted desperately to have something happen, but the reality was the characters weren't going to just let it happen, and he spent all night in disappointment as we all heard things, and saw things, and investigated things. But nothing directly happened to him. Of all four of us, his stuff wasn't touched, and to be frank, he was slightly annoyed when he drifted off to sleep. It was as we were all sitting there talking, waiting to turn the lights off to sleep, that it happened. As Dustin lay there sleeping, not moving in any way, suddenly the blanket and sheets covering him lifted into the air. They were held there for a second and it woke him up. His mouth dropped. The bedding was pulled off him up to his waist. We were all stunned. I ended up falling asleep as Timmy and Cartman continued in conversation. Dustin finally got his wish, and he slowly drifted off to sleep too. We cracked a few chem lights and put them in the middle of everyone, and eventually the talking stopped and we all passed out. When we woke up several hours later, we began packing up and preparing to say our goodbyes. When we left the camera, we had several pictures to take, and when we woke up and looked at the camera, ready to get rid of the last few items of film, we noticed that all of the film had been expended, yet the camera was in the exact same place it was when we left it. We did not take those last pictures. We asked for the 1 hour photo people to print every single one regardless of how it turned out. Not only did they ignore the request, but they said the last several items were dark and blurry, with a blurred green and yellow light source in the image. That light source was of course the chem lights. We knew the subject of those last several images had become us. The hunters became the hunted.
This was the last hurrah in the basement. The coming summer we would turn the basement into my bedroom, and that was the final straw for our cast of characters, and it would prove to be our undoing. I had just finished up 6th grade and was preparing to enter junior high. It was June 2003. My family decided that I needed a bigger room, that I had outgrown my bedroom. In some ways, they were right. So, it was decided I would get the basement to myself, complete with a queen-size bed, a new desk, a recliner, a new lamp, and plenty of space. And, as I would soon learn, new horrors. The move was simple enough. I slept on the queen-size bed in the basement and moved all my things down there. My old bedroom became the den, complete with an old TV and a few couches. The closet was now used for spare blankets instead of clothes. And to be honest, I was excited about this change, the freedom I was given, and to have fun in the basement for a while. Late that summer after I moved in, the basement came alive at night, and all of my fun was for nothing. I could hear everything, shuffling around the basement, my drawers opening and shutting, things falling over. But by this point, we accepted it as part of the house. I was disappointed to say the least. Ghosts were becoming a popular item, and ghost hunting shows began to be a thing. On the advice of a talk show medium, Mum pulled me aside and had a talk. Look, I've been watching some shows, and on the shows they say just talk with the ghosts. They were people too, and if you tell them to leave, they will. This sounded about right, as the books from years past said to had talked to them as well, so I decided it was time. It was late in the summer. I sat in my recliner pondering how I was going to do this. I was reading a book, when suddenly a noise occurred in the basement. I sat there and mustered as much courage as I could and politely said, "Hey, come here for a second. I want to talk." Immediately a dark mist began to envelop my lamp, and the light slightly dimmed. I could tell it was next to me. "I moved down here. This is my room. Can you please leave? This is our house." The dark mist disappeared. I told my mother, and to be honest, things were quiet for a little while. School had started up, and I can still remember that first morning when it broke loose. My oscillating fan started to click, and I woke up to see it being held in place as I tried to move. I didn't think anything of it. It was 5 a.m., and I still had about 90 minutes left of sleep. Suddenly, I heard, "Hey, get up," in a loud booming voice next to my ear. I thought I was dreaming, but then the bed began to shake. I was up. This continued almost every night. The basement came alive, like it used to. Shades rolled up violently in the middle of the night. Yells of "wake up" happening next to my head. The fandom would randomly begin to click and be held. The bed violently shaking so that I couldn't sleep. I would feel someone grab me when I slept. Voices were heard in the back room of the basement behind my head, and it became a nightmare. The pace was unprecedented. What I thought would decrease suddenly and drastically increased. By this point, we had reached October 2003. With 1 month to go, what we did not realize was the full fury of Liberty Street was about to be unleashed. Ask any child what junior high school is like, and they'll tell you it's not fun in any way. For the first time, our entire school district was forced together. It wasn't just my elementary school, it was 4 combined. Cliques formed, hormones started, and tensions ran high. Brian Cartman and I experienced a lot of the same bullying because we were both a little odd, not like creepy, but sort of nerdy. Mid-October 2003 was the last time I had a friend over, until April 2005, when Timmy Davis and I started hanging out again. In the lunch line, Brian and I started talking about Liberty Street and remembering the Great Hunt. He had this idea. Maybe this weekend I could come over and we could hunt some ghosts and chill. I was keen on this. It was a few weeks before Halloween, and our hometown looked like something from a scary movie in the fall. So on Friday we made this happen. The rules were the same. We had a disposable camera in preparation and were going to keep it in a central spot. The hunt was different. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. The house was quiet. We heard a few noises, but aside from that, nothing compared to the great hunt. We never really slept. Instead, we played games nearly all night, and sometime in the pre-dawn, we finally fell asleep. When we woke up some hours later, we discovered the camera had been moved. A few shots had been taken. We took no night photos. We had fun taking as many pictures as we could that morning so we could develop the film. And we told the people to develop all the pictures. But we were told every single one of them except the first few shots were unusable. Thinking back on this, I feel mocked. Everything had changed, and instead of living life, the characters were now just doing things to spite us. This incident would mark the last few weeks we were there, and the beginning of the endgame being played by the characters. Activity in the basement picked up again, and much of the same started happening, though this would pale in comparison to what the final week had in store for us. When I would sit as a practice student for my dad, or when I would spend time in the field with him, I learned something: surprise, speed, and violence of action. This is the way. My time as an ROTC candidate, my schooling as an intelligence professional, and additional training with federal and local law enforcement drove the same points home: surprise, speed, and violence of action. The principle is simple. When you have a surprise, the speed of your operation can be slow, and the violence of action needed to complete the objective can be low. As you lose surprise, the mission's tempo must increase, and the violence of action needed to complete the objective must increase too. To stay with the frog analogy, the water is almost to that boiling point, and the frog knows there's a major problem, but it's too late. After Brian Cartman and I had our last hunt, the tables turned. The pace increased drastically. There weren't little surprises anymore, and the speed and violence of action had increased. There were some peaceful nights, and there were others where things just broke loose. By this point, the wedge in our family had started to grow. Rachel and I were discontent with sleeping in our own beds, citing the noises and things we were seeing, and this in turn caused friction between my parents, our mother experiencing the same thing alongside of us, and my father, who didn't have a single thing happen to him. We were all tired, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Halloween is a time for kids to have fun and get candy, and in the days leading up to it, Rachel had got a bunch from school and set it on her bed. Mum, Dad, and Rachel had to run an errand to pick up some medicine at the store. I didn't want to go to the store with them, opting to play a computer game in the front office instead. They shut Rachel's door, made sure Brady was in the living room, and went on their way. It was quiet, and not much happened. So for a little while I sat there glued to the screen playing this game. When they got home, Rachel exploded, as did my parents. They came rushing into the office angry. "Why did you do this? Where did you put her candy?" they yelled at me. I wasn't aware she'd gotten any candy, and asked them what they meant. They accused me of lying, and told them I had eaten all of her candy, or at least a couple of pieces, and hidden the rest. I assured them I did no such thing. What they found when they got home was an empty candy bag with a few wrappers nearby. I asked if Brady had done this, and they told me the door was shut, and he wouldn't have been able to. I don't remember how, but I was able to prove my innocence, and the blame was placed on Brady, through much suspension of disbelief. Ursula then became a fixture of the household, as we saw her nearly every day. And after we saw her, the room she was in would be trashed. For instance, after leaving the bathroom one evening to put my clothes in the washroom, I thought I saw Rachel in the den. When I got to my parents' room, she was watching TV with them. When I went back to the den, it was destroyed. Couches turned on their backs, remotes strewn all over the room, batteries removed from the remotes, drawers in the desk open and their contents emptied. We were dumbfounded. We had no idea how or why this would happen, and as per the usual, we pulled our mattress into their room and bedded down for the night. During this time, we also had the largest poltergeist incident happen to us. One night after dinner, suddenly, items fell over in every room at once. There was no tremor, and there was no noise. It was just sudden. The spices in the kitchen all fell over onto the floor. Secured remotes in the den fell out of their baskets, and toys in the back room of the basement fell out of their boxes. We sat there in disbelief. Once again, it was 3 against 1. Tempers flared as we cleared up the mess. Music had been an important part of my life. When we were little, my parents brought us an electric keyboard that sat in the basement. I loved playing with this thing. The problem was it was supposed to be battery operated, but eventually the wiring burnt out on it. It could only operate via plug. When I moved into the basement, some old things had to be packed away. One of these things was the piano, because even with the plug it stopped working properly. We put it in the back room near the sump pump that summer. We had just finished dinner and were working on homework. I was doing math. The maths teacher was unreasonable in some regards, which made the task all that more difficult. We were all tired and frustrated due to the long sleepless nights. Mum was in her bedroom and Dad was in the living room. Rachel and I first heard it. We were next to the basement. We were all tired and frustrated due to the long sleepless nights. Mum was in her bedroom and Dad was in the living room. Rachel and I heard it first, as we were next to the basement stairs. At first it was a few notes, and we raised our heads. Then it was a couple of meters and we stood up. Suddenly it was an entire melody being played. We grabbed our parents. "I don't hear a thing," Dad said. "Listen, how can you not hear this?" Mum said, frustrated, as was becoming the pattern with him, as the wedge created by Liberty Street grew larger. We got closer to the stairs and the music continued. All 3 of us looked at each other as we descended the stairs. We, Dad excluded, could hear the same tune. We described it perfectly to each other, and as we approached the backroom door, the tune continued, louder than before. We pressed our ears up against the door and could hear the sound. The 3 of us stood there, and we opened the door, and as soon as we touched the doorknob, the music stopped. There was no one in that room, and everything was as it was. That night, we decided to pull the mattresses into their room again. This was the beginning of Hell Week, our last week as full-term residents at Liberty Street. It was only supposed to last 1 week, and then we would be back in our own rooms. That was the theory anyway. We were tired, frustrated at each other's throats, and praying for it to end. Dad wasn't thrilled by any means, but honestly, us 3 did not care. Things were starting to happen, and the pace and intensity increased tenfold. It was the beginning of November. For the first evening it was quiet, and Dad sat in the living room for a couple of evenings. Rachel and I talked with Mum. We told her we always felt safe in her room, and that's when the shadow moved. I don't remember who saw it. Honestly, it doesn't matter. The welts started up again, the redness, the bruises. Nowhere was safe. Each night, one of us would wake up to a violent slap. Sometimes, before we would go to sleep, we would feel a violent push, or our skin would start burning. There were mostly marks. This continued for the better part of the week. There was no pattern. We would be going about our day and suddenly it would be happening. When sleeping, there was no indication of when this would happen, just that it would. A blissful sleep, followed by a sharp stinging sensation that would not leave for a few minutes, and a welt or handprint in the location of the sting. Things were quiet 1 day later in the week. Nothing major happened. We went to bed wondering what would happen next. And at about 10 p.m. it started, and I was the target. I awoke to a sting. I sat up in bed. Nothing. Then the slap happened. It was loud and my face moved. I woke everyone up. As they were watching, the pinch happened on my back, following by another slap. It didn't stop. I remember Rachel felt something at one point and began crying. I was crying. My parents were frustrated. Dad blew his lid. He yelled at us. He yelled at the house and everything. Mum yelled at him and the house as well. We didn't know what to do. We called my grandparents and they said they would have a place for us for a little bit. We packed a change of clothes and all our toiletries as quickly as we could and grabbed our school bags. Rachel and I got in the van and sat in our respective seats. Mum and Dad packed some things and were arguing with each other in the house. And that's when Rachel and I saw him. Cousin It stood on the hood of the van, just a dark shadow of a man. He began to move. He slowly walked around the van. We screamed and cried, and this happened for several minutes as Mum and Dad got their affairs in order. When they opened the garage door, he disappeared as suddenly as he came. We drove in relative silence until we made it to their house, and we slept in the bedroom off the red room, which is their second living room upstairs. We went to school and back to Liberty Street, and all was quiet. We packed our things for the night and went back to our grandparents' house. We had decisions to make. Our world had changed. No place was safe in Liberty Street. We tried to make sense of everything, but more questions came. What would we do with Liberty Street? What would happen now? One thing we knew is that we had a place to stay for a little while, and we had decisions to make. What we did not know first entering this situation is that this would be the final section of our lives at Liberty Street. It was 2003. Ghosts were not a public thing at this point. Sure, you had some ghost cams on the web around Halloween and some local haunted hotels, and the local haunted spots would sometimes get a place in the paper, but there was no show like Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, and the local ghost hunting groups were seen as crazies, although in honesty, the ones in our town were a little crazy. How do you tell someone that you've fled your house? The answer is simple. You don't. We felt embarrassed and ashamed. Our grandparents lived in a part of town where some teachers and other members of the school lived, as well as some of our classmates. Surely someone would notice us being there at some point. But we had our excuses ready. So the answer was simple. No one needs to know we moved from Liberty Street. The solution was simple also. For a short time, perhaps a month or so, we would spend our days at Liberty Street and then before bed would leave and go to our grandparents' house. They opened up their guest house to us and put some extra beds in the upstairs. Dad was not a fan of this solution and spent many nights at Liberty Street alone. We figured a few weeks things would be alright and we could move back into our normal lives at Liberty Street. We still had questions, and these questions were as such. What will the new normal look like? It was a few weeks into the new arrangement, and I was sick from school. Honestly, I was exhausted, fed up, bullied, and that was that. So we dropped my sister off at school, and I hatched a plan. We had questions and we wanted answers. The county Liberty Street resides in is the largest in our state. The county office was about a 40-minute drive from Liberty Street, so we decided to pay the county clerk's office a visit while my sister was in school and my dad at work. We didn't have any money to make copies of items, but we could read every document in the building until we were content. What we knew about Liberty Street was limited, and we discussed it on our way to the county buildings. We knew that it was moved onto the property around mid-60s.
Mum claims one of my uncles saw it being moved on the location. What we also knew is that the previous owner wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible and didn't look back. We figured this would be a good start. When we got there, we asked the clerk on duty for property records, and they showed us where they were located. It was broken down by addresses, and we traced our steps backwards, starting with us. We made it to the 60s, and found when the house was moved to its current location. We found the old address, and moved to the corresponding records. When we got there, we started looking. The property was built around 1922. We followed the records for about 4 years when we noticed that they ceased to exist. In 1926, the records vanished. We went back to our property records and then back to 1922. No trace. The record showed that it did not reside at any other location aside from the 2 addresses. Essentially, almost 40 years of property records were missing. We left with even more questions. We drove home and we thought about what was near the old addresses. An old bar. The smell of alcohol that we could periodically smell over the years could maybe be connected to that bar. That was maybe one answer. We didn't mention this to anyone else. We never discussed the adventure with anyone, and I'm not sure if those records exist currently or have been found, but it would not surprise me if they were never located. These missing records were not the last to go missing, however. Just shy of 2 years after Liberty Street sold, my grandmother passed away. She fell and hit her head in the kitchen, and between her medicine and the injury, she required brain surgery the night she fell, and she never recovered. For 10 days we waited for her to either wake up or pass away. We had hoped that she would recover, but we knew what the ultimate outcome was likely to be. Liberty Street and the ultimate decision to never move back was similar. The 2 to 3 weeks we played with the 2 life game, we ultimately knew what the outcome had to be. One will never know the feeling of going into that house. The silence of a cold November day. The feeling of it not being your home. The question on everyone's mind was what the tipping point would be, and ultimately, it would be a ball of silly putty. To grasp the foolishness of the situation, let me explain what a typical weekday was like. We would wake up at our grandparents' guest house, we would then get dressed and ready to go. We would leave for school, and once school was done we would go to Liberty Street and have dinner and do homework. We would then pack up and go back to our grandparents' house for bed. On weekends it was much worse, as we would sleep in a little, get up and go, and then off to Liberty Street for the day, around late morning. We would spend the day there until evening, and then we would have dinner and off to our grandparents' house. This went on until the silly putty incident. It was a weekend. We were quite bored. Mum and Dad were in the front office working on something with the computer. Rachel in the living room reading and sleeping, and it was around 2 to 3 p.m. I had locked myself in the den. I shut and locked the hallway door, and I shut and locked the den door. I opened the desk, pulled out the silly putty, and as I was playing with it, I had the TV going as well. We were all bored out of our minds, and after a little while, I put the silly putty back into its egg and put it on the desk. I was playing darts with an old mechanical pencil where there were lead tips that you could stack, and I found the lead tips made for excellent darts, when suddenly Rachel screamed. I left the den for the living room to find her and my parents confused as to what happened. Her back had a bruise on it. On the floor, near the couch, was a ball of silly putty. We all looked confused and wondered where it came from. I said there was one in the den, but I had been playing with it and put it away. There was no way it could be in the living room. So I went back to the den to show them that it was still there. We opened the egg-shaped container, and it was empty. The silly putty that had struck her back with such force to leave a bruise had come from this container, which was shut and in the drawer of a room that was locked, in a hall that was locked. We immediately dropped what we were doing and left. We decided it was the last time we were ever going to play the day living game. We had everything there. We had not packed at this point, and we would return to get the mail and check it every day, but that was it. No more living two lives. It was a drill weekend. Rachel was asleep, and Mum and I did the mail run. This was the last time we would go inside the house on mail runs, as after this point, we decided to move the computer to the guest house. When Mum and I walked into the house, we went straight to the front office. There was a TV above the computer, and as Mum and I were talking while she was on the computer, in the TV we could see a man's dark shadow walk into the room behind us. We both slowly turned around, but no one was there, and when we turned back to the TV, no one was there either. We left shortly after, and brought the computer over to avoid awkward situations such as this. By this point we had decided to move, but how was the question? We were still insistent on keeping things on the down low about the living situation, but we were no longer going to live at Liberty Street. The final straw and decision about if we cared or not came a month later when Rachel and her friends decided to have a sleepover. My sister had a group of friends over for the sleepover. We didn't want to do it in the back building, so my mum figured to do it at Liberty Street. She would take the girls over and stay with them. For fun, she bought all disposable cameras so they could record for their party. All the girls put the cameras on the nightstand next to the bed and crashed on top of the bed in short order after shutting the hall and bedroom doors. The next day, when everyone woke up, the cameras were missing. They found them scattered to the wind in various parts of the living room, and after that, it was decided that staying there in any fashion would be out of the question. We decided to sell Liberty Street, and we stated that we would never mention that there were ghosts unless we had to tell the real estate agent. We wanted it gone, and we wanted it done. When we first moved in, my grandmother used to tell my mother that ghosts were not real. They were a figment of the imagination. By now it had become clear that yes, something was there. My grandma used to come over every single day except weekends in the summer and before my sister and I went to school. She was a daily part of our lives. She was there when I was stabbed. She also listened to our stories and why we were at her home. She was mad because her family was being targeted, so her and Mum hatched a plan. After dropping Rachel and I off at school, they decided to go over to Liberty Street and confront Cousin It and the others. The plan was for them to literally stand in the house and scream at whatever was there. They didn't care if it left. They just wanted their say in all of this. They entered the house and started to yell. They went into every room and gave the characters a piece of their mind, and as they started towards the bedrooms and hallways, they were confronted with a charged gust that felt as if they'd been hit with electricity. At the same time, without saying so, they were brought to their knees by an overwhelming electrified force that lasted for almost a minute. Soon the energized feeling left, and they could stand again, and they both left. For the rest of her life, my grandmother would say that this was the scariest moment of her life. After this, for her, there was no doubt something was really there. I do not believe she ever stepped foot inside of Liberty Street again, following that incident. That spring, we contacted a realtor by the name of Rick. He was a local acquaintance that went to high school with my mum. When he sat down and looked at the financial side of everything, he declined taking the property on and referred us to another relative of a new realtor called Chris. He was young and had spunk, and had only been in the business for a few years, whereas Rick had been in it for at least 15 to 20. This was before the internet made being a realtor easier than it used to be, and anyone that's been in the business for more than a few years was still new, but not bad. This was a contributing factor for Chris taking Liberty Street as a property. When my mother spoke to him, he asked her, "So do you have anything you'd like to disclose about the property? Why are you selling it? It's such a nice location and wonderful home. In fact, you'd probably lose money selling it." Mum stated plain out, "Chris, it's haunted." He laughed and said, "I sold dozens of houses, had people tell me their house is haunted. and I have yet to actually have something happen. I don't believe in ghosts." They agreed to disagree. We provided him with a key and were told that by next week there was going to be an open house. Following the open house weekend, we asked Chris how it went. We asked him if we had any potential buyers or if anyone even showed up. Chris told us the following: "I will never step foot in that house again unless someone's in there with me. You were right, there is something in that house." We pressed Chris for more details on how he suddenly changed his views on the paranormal, and we were not too shocked to learn he only lasted half an hour, and that he was never going to do another open house again, because that meant he would need to be on his own, waiting for other people to arrive. His story was similar to what happened to David Johns and I a few years earlier, because as Chris sat on the patio waiting for someone, he began to hear people inside the house walking and opening doors. He went into the house to greet them, and as he stood in the kitchen, he could hear footsteps and things being opened coming from right in front of his eyes. The problem was there was no one there. He stood paralyzed in fear and confusion as he realized that he was not alone, and that the footsteps were coming right towards him. Before they got to him, they ceased. He immediately locked the doors and left. With a realtor involved, we decided it was time to start packing. Slowly but surely we began the process. We moved most of the essential items into the back building, and more items would follow later. Around this time, Dad got orders cut for deployment to Virginia as the first sergeant of an MP company. He'd be leaving January 05, and by August/September of 04, a friend named Tommy Hodge would join us on some hunts, and our lives would change forever. Tommy Hodge was just your average goofball. He was in class with Rachel. He was normal height, a little chubby, and had an infectious smile. He always had a joke to share, and he was just a fun guy to be around. He also had a good brain. He started hanging out with us in summer of 04, and was always curious about the paranormal. Like most people in our town, he had a few personal stories. Some centered around a Ouija board that his family owned. Ouija boards are controversial. Many people laugh and say it's just fun little gag toys for parties, and others say they're devices to communicate with the other side. And in our experience, the latter is true. My mother gave me their old camcorder, and the battery didn't work, so I had to stay plugged in. Armed with a tape recorder, camcorder, notebook, compass, and other gear, I was ready for any hunt. We decided on a day and time, and Tommy brought his Ouija board. Mom, Rachel, Tommy, and I left for Liberty Street. The feeling when we walked in was normal. It felt off like always. We had not entirely packed up, so couches, some end tables, and lamps, and other random items were still around. As they got the board set up, I got the camcorder set up. I put it on the bar counter, plugged it in, and got it ready. I don't recall fully participating in any session we did, and mostly just stood by as an observer. Once things warmed up, answers started to flow. There were answers provided that only Mum and I would have known, such as what was located next to Liberty Street. We got other answers, such as the name of the little girl, Ursula. We found out more information about the soldier, and that he was the one who stabbed me. Similar answers, or none at all. Partway through the session, Tommy felt something touch his shoulder. While they were next to some furniture, they were far enough away that they would have known if they'd have bumped into something, and would have had to lean back. They were hunched over the board. The furniture was about 2 feet behind them, and nothing happened for a few more minutes, and the board went quiet. Suddenly, Tommy complained about the same feeling, and turned around, thinking perhaps some cobweb had snagged him. But there was nothing there. I moved the camcorder to the basement and began filming as they began their session. I left the basement and went back upstairs. We continued, but the board was dead by this point. We had no answers, nothing. So we closed, packed everything up, and left to review the footage. When we got home, we plugged the camcorder into the TV and began watching the footage. At one point on tape, the lamp at the end of the table behind Tommy began to shake. We could see him move his hand to scratch his neck, and the lamp stops. A minute later, the lamp began to shake again, and he scratches the back of his neck again. Then the table and the lamp both move slightly. And after that is when he turned it around and says that he felt something touch him. A few minutes later, the table and lamp begin to move yet again, and that's when he notes that something touched him again. Nothing happened in the basement that we could observe. We sat and pondered over the evidence of that session, and decided to go back again the next day to try. When we came back, things were different. We set up the camcorder and started the process. Weird things began happening. Some noises began in other parts of the house. Things were more intense in this session. The answers we got became more violent and centered around murder and killing people. They centered around harming us and touching us. Tommy once again started to complain that something was touching him. We immediately checked the footage and saw the table and lamp moving like the day before. Noises in Liberty Street began to increase immensely, and the answers became worse and worse. At one point, the letters became jumbled, and then the answers stopped. We closed the session. We went home, all of us almost in tears. Tommy did not laugh or joke around on the drive. He was terrified, we all were. When we got home, we talked to Dad, told him what happened, and he wasn't happy. He was frustrated at the risks we took to ourselves and to our chances of selling the home. And we decided to burn the board, and everything related to those 2 days, videotapes, reference books for historical events, etc. We did so on a barbecue grill at the local park. While Tommy hung out with us some more, he was never quite the same. He looked at us differently. He had this constant look of, how could you do this to me? Eventually, after a few more months of hanging out, we had a slight falling out over a trivial personal matter that both parties used as an excuse. By this point, it was around early October 2004. Dad's deployment was looming over us, and we wanted to pack before he left. When we decided to finish packing up, it was mid-October 2004. We had done a lot of packing, but there were still things that needed to be done. The only things left were really the master bedroom closet, the back room of the basement, and the attic. Over the years, we had many things go missing. The biggest, of course, was Rachel's Adidas jacket. We figured it either had to be in one of these places. The back room was not so bad, just a matter of putting toys and other random items into boxes and being done with it. Then we moved on to the master bedroom closet and began the process. It wasn't all too bad. We packed up the remaining stuff from the cubbyhole in the closet and moved on to the attic, and there were still no signs of the jacket. The attic was a place where we kept decorations. Christmas, Halloween, Easter stuff, that's where we kept it. As well as random items that didn't really have a true place. A lot of items there had boxes already. Every box we pulled from the attic we opened to verify the contents, but really we were just looking for that jacket. Rachel was on the landing, Mum on the stairs, and Dad was moving the items into the master bathroom, where the attic door was located. The process was that I would bring a box to Mum, who would verify the contents, who would then give it to Rachel and Dad. It involved me crawling through the attic. It was a fairly high ceiling, but I spent most of my time there on my hands and knees, and bringing items from the back to the front for our mum. We continued on for a few hours in this way, and it wasn't too bad. It was only when we had a few boxes left that things turned for the worst. One of the random items in the attic was a vase. Nothing special about it really, just that it found a home up there. It was on the other side of the attic. Mum and I were dealing with a box when we heard a sliding sound. We couldn't determine where it was coming from until it was too late. While the noise went on for a few seconds before we noticed what it was, the last second we both watched in horror as the vase slid the last few feet to the edge of the stairs, tipped over, and began plummeting towards Rachel's head. Mum let out a scream as the vase landed right next to her right side up, as if someone had placed it there. We looked at each other. Rachel looked up, frozen in fear, and Dad popped his head in worried, wondering what had just happened. Mum, Rachel and I explained, and he got angry. He said, "Let's just finish up and get out of here, okay? I'm done with this." We gathered the last few boxes and left. Liberty Street was empty. There was nothing left in that house. Now all that was left was to wait for Chris to do his job and sell the house. October 2004 would be a blessing in disguise. However, a new set of shows came to the TV, and these shows would help us in our last little hurrah against Liberty Street. In the movie The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise's character leads an unprepared army against samurai warriors. They were undisciplined, ill-equipped, and overrun in a matter of minutes. He is then captured and spends an unknown period at this village. When he returns to the city, he finds new technology in place both for the people and the military he previously led. They have become a professional army with modern equipment, and the next battle they face, the last battle of the film, they are able to accomplish what they were unable to do at the beginning. And thus it was with us in ghost hunting that October. Around mid-October, Mum said to check out this new show called Ghost Hunters. It was on Sci-Fi, and about these plumbers that also did ghost hunting. I said okay, and one evening we watched it. It was amazing. Every technique I had learned from the James Dean book, they improved upon. Their technology was outstanding. They had meters that could replace my compass and cameras that could see in the dark without flashlights. Theories discussed in their book were expanded upon and explained better. We watched and studied and visited their website, where they had even more how-to guides. By this point, my grandparents had also given me an old 35mm camera, complete with a bag and other equipment for it. Armed with this new knowledge, the camcorder, tape recorder, notebook, pencils and pens, compass, and red maglite, we were ready for the fight. Rachel was mostly burnt out at this point and didn't participate much with Mum and I. Armed with new knowledge, improved equipment, and many questions, Mum and I would go to Liberty Street and set up shop for an hour or two on drill weekends or during the week. Sometimes we caught nothing, other times it was a plethora. On one occasion we entered Liberty Street with our tape recorder going. We were going to set down to have an electronic voice phenomenon session, EVP, and we left to explore and take pictures and videos of the house. You could hear us in the background walking away and talking while getting the camcorder set up. There was nothing that happened too much during the hunt, but when we reviewed the tapes later, we could distinctly hear, as if someone had put their face right up to the microphone, the single word, "bitch," in an angry, growling voice. We caught many voices and laughter on tape throughout our hunts at Liberty Street, many of which sounded like the laugh we caught during the tape during Rachel and I's first elf hunt. Another time Rachel did join us. We caught Cousin Id on film as he was walking away from our group. I was watching the camera when it happened and was able to follow him into the patio, where he stood in the corner for a few seconds but vanished as we moved up to get to him. This was the only time we ever captured him on video or picture. It was an emotional moment for us. We had finally got him. While we called him every name in the book, he never came back out to us. He really was just a bully and a coward. Orbs were what we mostly caught in videos and pictures. Some pictures were filled with them, while others were devoid of them. They would seemingly come out of nowhere and move into nowhere. We also caught flashes of light on both videos and in pictures. Just as with the orbs, there was never a reasonable explanation. Noises were a big part of everything. Sometimes, while being quiet, you could hear walking or breathing or just random things. There was no pattern to it at all. Nothing. You could be in the room and hear something come from somewhere else. The tape recorders never fully picked up the noise. They would occasionally, other times they didn't. You would be standing there hearing it, and at the same time everyone in the room is looking at each other and wondering what happened. As we progressed, however, things became duller. We started catching less, and things started to happen less. The junior high where I went was an old building from around 1905. It had its own stories, and many teachers were curious about the paranormal. One of which was Mr. Bisbee. I had him as a teacher the previous year, and his classroom was the only classroom on the choir room wing of the building. The choir room was only used in the morning and was empty for the rest of the day. Many teachers had experienced things around the choir room, but none of them had gotten the brunt of it like Mr. Bisbee. I had swapped stories with a few teachers, but the one that always liked discussing theory was him, so we invited him along to a ghost hunt. The night had started off normally. We stayed together. Rachel, Mum, Mr. Bisbee and I went from room to room. We told him of experiences in each room. Nothing really happened, except when he thought he saw an orb shoot into his leg. We all still chuckle about that. It turns out it was just a speck of dust from the attic ceiling. We showed him some of the evidence we'd caught in previous hunts, and he found it very interesting. By this point, things in Liberty Street had begun to cool off, but we persisted. The last hunt we did, Mum and I went there with our 35mm camera and we took pictures. When we got them developed, we caught the Holy Grail. The last picture I took in the house was of the kitchen. I just felt the urge to do so. And that last picture contained the best photo from anything we caught at Liberty Street. In the image was a full-color picture of the soldier. You could see his web gear, the sergeant's chevrons on his arm, his wide-brimmed helmet, and his face was obscured with his gas mask. Next to him was a little white dog. You could see the black nose, black eyes, all of it. After a few more tries at Liberty Street, we didn't catch anything, or have anything happen. We left my ghost hunting briefcase at Liberty Street to protect the evidence, and in case we wanted to do something spontaneous, and got rid of the camcorder 35mm as they were broken from use and age. Around the time we expanded to the local cemetery. It's a popular fall location, as our town is noted for a disaster where almost 100 people were killed in the 1800s, and the unidentified bodies and body parts were buried at this cemetery. Many stories came from this place, and we branched into some minor hunts of opportunity here after school because it was a cool little location, and it was different than Liberty Street. These hunts were mostly us driving around and looking to see if we could see anything. On one such drive, we were going through the cemetery when Rachel calls out, "Stop, she's over there, Ursula's over there." We stopped the car and ran to the location, and there on the ground was a headstone. It had the name Ursula displayed. The odd part is the stone that had this Ursula was an older woman, not the younger child we were used to. By this time, it was around December, we had bigger fish to fry. Dad was being deployed soon, and we spent as much time as we could as a family and forgot about Liberty Street. He left for Virginia at the beginning of January and would not return for 15 months. That spring, I started hanging out with Timmy Davis again. We didn't talk about Liberty Street. Instead, we focused on airsoft and getting ready for high school. The past was the past, and the future was bright for everyone. Spring and summer of '05 were grand. Timmy and I spent most days in the woods playing airsoft, and we had some adventures visiting Dad too. I was about to go into high school, and the past seemed like the past. I did normal teenager things, and band kept me busy that summer too. The picture of the soldier and dog I kept safe from Liberty Street got eaten by Brady and Lizzie. Lizzie was the dog we brought the previous summer. I was disappointed, but it was okay. It was the past. We learned that Liberty Street was no longer ours. We finally had a potential buyer, and our adventures there would come to an end. We were also going to be moving into a rental house until Dad was done with deployment. What was supposed to be a short-term solution had lasted over a year and a half, and we were ready for the move. There was one last thing that needed to be done, and Mum and I went to retrieve it. In the empty basement of Liberty Street sat a brown, leather briefcase. In this briefcase were audio and videotapes, pictures, mostly of orbs. The Holy Grail image was something I wanted to keep with me, so I knew where it was, notes, some equipment, and other similar things. Only 2 people knew the code, myself and my dad. When we pulled the briefcase out of the basement and opened it on the bar counter, it was empty. except for the tape recorder, compass, and my red mag light. My old elf hunting turned ghost hunting kit was empty. Evidence stating to before we knew there were ghosts and things we collected over the last year and a half were now gone. Our experiences there would only be marked by a few trinkets in the form of simple gear from the hunt, like the Adidas coat and other things lost there. The evidence would become part of Liberty Street and part of the mystique. With negotiations and other legal goings on, it took until January 2006 for the sale to close. Ironically, it was the same month we bought what was our dream home, what Liberty Street was supposed to be for us. And after July 2005 to pick up the briefcase, we never stepped foot there again. In a horror movie, this would be the part where everyone walks away happy, and the closing secret is revealed just at the end. But what they never show is the impact. Timmy and Rachel do not talk about Liberty Street. For them especially, it was a point of trauma. I've told friends the story, and many wish they could have experienced it alongside me, to be able to have this grand adventure. I tell them they're lucky not to. For myself, I couldn't sleep alone without a nightlight until I was in college, and the sound of a low-battery smoke detector makes me uneasy. While house hunting with my wife, we decided to avoid older homes, and any older homes we did consider, we had an EMF detector ready just to see if there was anything the eye couldn't see. Despite some of my quirks that have come from that place, I do look back at it with a sort of fondness. There were some good memories there, a lot of them, and the thrill of the hunt shaped me into my current profession. The neighborhood has changed, and a lot of the old faces are gone. The retirement community they built into the woods still stands, and some of the properties around Liberty Street lie vacant and abandoned. When I travel home and drive by the house, I always wonder what the new owners have experienced. Have they experienced what we did? Or did it go dormant? What I do know is that for as long as I live, I will never forget what happened in that house. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I genuinely hope that you have enjoyed tonight's story. I'd like to extend a huge thank you, as always, to our members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And thank you to the person who let me narrate this story. It was a thrilling read, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you'd like to see even more, links can be found on screen now. But until then, stay awesome. Good night.